Hello and welcome to another episode of TPA Talks. My name is Elliot Keck. I'm the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, and I've got with me here Robert Midgley, who is a spokesperson for the Friends of the British Overseas Territories, former number 10 advisor as well. And we're going to talk all things Chagos. Quick bit of context to this: we just had the second reading of, is it called the Diego Garcia bill? I think that's what they call it.
Two bills going on.
Two bills going on at the moment. So we just had the second reading of one of them. And I read in the bill, I think one of the clauses is to formally hand over sovereignty to Mauritius of the Chagos Islands. And I thought, for our viewers, we've been spending a lot of time at Taxpayers Alliance talking about how much it costs and how the government is valuing it. And obviously that's a very important part of the equation in terms of taxpayers, in terms of government spending. But, I think it's also really important that people understand the context of the Chagos Islands, how this deal would come about, what the different claims are. And Robert, I know that you've really immersed yourself, and FOTBOT as well, immersed yourself in the details of all of this. So I think it's, be really interesting for our viewers to sort of hear from you the history of this, how this has come about, how we're even in the position where we are being forced to pay quite a lot of money to surrender British sovereignty over an archipelago.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a bottomless pit of information.
Which is the problem.
Just before our pre-brief, I was saying, there's so many strands that come out of this. You've got the sabotage, the UN, the lawfare, the dodgy lawyers, you've got the money. It's like, how far back do you want to go? But we can go all the way back to the Napoleonic Wars, where we won the Battle of Waterloo, and as a consequence of that, France owned both Mauritius and Chagos Islands, and they were both ceded to us as two separate territories. It's very important to say that to start with. They were two separate territories.
Understandably, because of how far away they are.
And I think there was over 2 year difference between them being ceded over.
Yeah.
So we kept them as two separate territories. And also, Chagos Islands is about 3,000 kilometres from Mauritius, if not a bit more.
Yeah.
They're actually closer to the Maldives. And actually, Maldives have a claim out on Chagos Islands because they are so close to the Maldives, and so India is closer to Chagos Islands
much closer,
than Mauritius is as well. So they were ceded over in the Battle of Waterloo, and there were people on the islands. There's three big islands. You've got Diego Garcia, you've got Paris Benos, and there's a third one that's escaped my mind. But there's three big islands, all with settlement on, all with people on. There's a coconut plantation. And they, people were living there. They had their own culture. They had their own way of life for hundreds of years. They weren't indigenous. They were brought on as slaves by the Dutch originally. So they weren't indigenous, and those people came from India. They came from East Africa. So they're actually direct descendants of slaves of people who were on those islands as well. That's a good point to make. And so we kept them there for 200 years, and then the World War II came along, and it was quickly established that Diego Garcia could be used as a military base. So a shipyard was built up there where ships could go repair, restock, and then they'd sail on. And then as the Cold War approached, it became apparent that it's actually a really good location for an air base as well. So I think this was around 1960 time. The US approached us and says, we want to have a place where we can house bombers, where we can have an air base that's going to be very safe. And so they proposed to build an airstrip. And originally they built the airstrip and the islanders were still there. And then it was actually the UK that proposed we should move them all off. And it wasn't just Diego Garcia that was affected. It was the outer islands as well. If you look on the map, the outer islands are actually really far away from Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia is
archipelago, isn't it?
It's on the very southeast side, and the other big islands are on the north side. I wish we had a map here today, but we don't. And so they said we'll have to just get rid of everyone. So then people were scattered across the Maldives. They were mainly brought to England, where Gatwick is now, around Crawley, and they were taken to Mauritius as well. So I'd say about 60% came to the UK, and then about 30% went to Mauritius, and about 10% went to the Maldives. So that caused a lot of problems because when they got to Mauritius, they were put into slums. People didn't really know the government didn't know what to do with them. It was a very weird situation, and the same with here. They were sort of flung into the Gatwick area because that's where the planes went into. So they were just sort of flung in there, and they weren't really recognised as like UK citizens at the time. People didn't know, including the government, didn't know what to do with them. So decades went on, and they were fighting to go back. This airbase was built. It was built in. It was operating as an airbase for like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they've served their purpose really well. And now it serves as like a place where intelligence is run through. It's incredibly strategic to us. If you look on a map, it's just south of India, so it's a gateway to the South China Sea.
And as I say, the Indo-Pacific, South China Sea, they are the key sort of geopolitical areas of contestation, or of where the big geopolitical powers are contesting geopolitics. That's sort of the area, isn't it? That's the big geography.
But also, if you look on the east coast of Africa, you would notice all these Chinese shipyards, air bases spring up all over the place. And a really good case study about the threat that we're dealing with right now is there's an island called Lega, which is part of Mauritius that India have actually bought and are turning it into an airbase. And to achieve that, Mauritius has depopulated it. They took all the medical supplies and food off the island, so people had to get a boat to the mainland to get those supplies, and then they didn't allow them to go back.
Yeah, and to go back to just touch on some of the history just for a moment, there's a couple of ideas about what British colonisation involved. And one of the things that people say about British colonisation is it involved us drawing artificial lines on a map and dividing up countries and territories. People even say that about Northern Ireland and Republic of Ireland. They obviously say it about India, Pakistan and Bangladesh with the Radcliffe lines. They say it about particularly the Middle East. It's important to say there was no point in history where Mauritius and the Chagos Islands were one single cohesive political entity.
No, they
That's
were never joined
existed.
up.
Mauritius and Chagos Islands were both essentially settled by slaves and European colonists, separate entities that happened to be controlled by the same colonial power. And
Mauritius was never a nation.
Exactly. And it was certainly never a nation combined with the Chagos Islands. And the reason for the Mauritian claim over the Chagos Islands is that as a function, as my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, as a function of essentially administrative reasons.
Because no one's living on the island.
Exactly.
It's impossible to live there. There's no fresh water, there's no food, there's no supplies. So they had to, it's like the Antarctic.
Yeah.
It's like we administer them from the Falkland Islands because there's no way of living there. So that's what we did with Mauritius and Chagos. It was
administered from Mauritius, and then when the Mauritius was given independence in 1968, we then separated Mauritius from the Chagos Islands. But again, this idea that they were some cohesive political entity going back centuries that we had artificially divided is nonsense, essentially.
Absolute nonsense,
So moving forward a bit then, how has such obvious errant nonsense been allowed to become this sort of truism of international law where, whatever you say about the British government's position, the clearly overwhelming consensus in international law is supposedly in favour of the Mauritian government's claim over Chagos Islands? How did we get from the 1960s to here?
I mean, this is, like I said at the start, this is a very much bottomless subject. So you would have to look at some interesting strands, which is first China and Russia, who are both nations that want to weaken us. China have repeatedly said that they want to degrade the West one island at a time. That has been their long-term goal. And that's generally their strategy, and they will do whatever they need to achieve that. That includes putting lawyers into the UN. That includes getting other countries to lobby us, to take away certain powers, to wage a lawfare against the UK and our allies. And so you've seen over the past, I would say 2 or 3 decades, that really grow. But there's also another side to this, that we have people within our own society who weaken us through thinking they're trying to be, like a saviour.
The Lord Hermans of the world.
This is the next topic that I'll be going on to, you have the people like the Lord Hermans in the world, the Felipe Sands in the world, who want to think they're correcting historic injustices, which is a huge problem to us, and especially since they've gained power, because they're hell-bent on trying to correct historic wrongs. And of course, you've got 60% of those Chagosians here, and I would say there's 3,000 in the UK, I'd say the vast majority of them actually want to remain British. They want the Chagos Islands to remain under Britain because they hate Mauritius so much. You know, it's illegal in Mauritius to be classed yourself as Chagosian. You get 10 years in prison if you class yourself as Chagosian, you know, under British control. That's absolutely insane. How can we deal with a society that's a civilization that's like that?
So to ask you a question you may not be able to answer, let's take the very sympathetic view towards the Lord Hermers of the world, and let's say that they genuinely, profoundly believe in ideas like decolonisation and correcting British historical misdeeds and injustices. Why, if you take that point of view and if that's your outlook, you have this very internationalist outlook, why would you pick the rights of Mauritius to have colonial control over the Chagos Islands? Why would you prefer that to the rights of the Chagosians to have self-determination in their own territory? That's the bit where, even if I take a sympathetic view and I try and put myself into the mindsets of the people that are engineering this deal, that's where I really, really struggle. Because if you take that argument to its logical extent, that it's all about self-determination and righting historical wrongs, how do you not end up backing the Chagosians' take?
So, I mean, as a charity, we do back the Chagosians' take.
No, I mean the Lord Hermers of the world. Like, how do they not come to that point of view?
I think that's to do with money.
So it's not based on principles, it's based on...
I think he has his own principles that, you know, he wants to correct a historic wrong.
Yeah.
He's got his own Chagosian clan in Mauritius who are very pro-Mauritius. Okay. And so he's spoken to them and he seems to think that that's the correct way of doing it. The Oliver Bancoots in the world. Yeah. So they all work together, these people. And so that's why he thinks that's the majority view. Yes. But actually, if you talk to any Chagosian in the UK, they have completely the opposite view. Yeah. So then he's taken that view and thinking it's in the national interest of the UK to give those islands back to those people in Mauritius. When actually it's not in the majority view. I see the government say this all the time. They say there's a range of different views across the Chagosian community.
Yes, of course, that's something they...
But they're talking about the advice that's coming from Mauritius. Yeah. They're not consulting the Chagosians in the UK. And, you know, the biggest groups, the Biot Citizens, the Chagosian Voices groups, they're fully in favour of it remaining under British sovereignty. So where they get this idea from, firstly, the Felipe Sands are being paid by Mauritius. They listen to the Mauritian Chagosians, who are obviously pro-Mauritius. So they're taking that view, they're taking the money, and then they're lobbying our government and saying, this is what Chagosians are thinking and saying, therefore we should do that.
Yeah, it's remarkable. All of this is dressed up as being some profound point of principle, but actually you just need to follow the money, and it turns out it's a cynical play.
You know, when I published about your story, actually, most of the replies was follow the money. Yeah. So I actually did a bit of research just this morning and followed the money. And
breaking exclusive.
Well, I'm not going to say everything.
Yes.
But I'm joined on to what happened in the Commons yesterday with the UN CLOS thing. Yeah. I did a bit of research into that. And it turns out that Felipe Sands had spoken about the UN CLOS at the UN in 2010.
Yeah, this is the UN Convention on the Law on the Seas.
Yes. And then he repeated these claims only a few years ago, before it became, you know, our problem. And obviously he was being paid by Mauritius. And then he brought it forward even further. And then there's an article that came out only about 2 weeks ago, I think it was Guido that announced it, that said there was a secret meeting between Hermer and Felipe Sands that they said in advance they wouldn't be disclosing the minutes of. And then after that meeting, suddenly UN CLOS became part of the government narrative. Yeah. Now, how did Lord Hermer, who's meant to be protecting the national interest, how did he know about this? Yeah. And why, as a legal professional, why did he not know about that defence of the Article 298?
Yeah. So let's get on to sort of let's get on to what the Mauritians claim is their legitimate claim to the territory, and which of these international institutions and treaties they're weaponising against us.
I mean, we can just look back at the non-binding agreement, the ICJ, which isn't meant to do sovereignty disputes, let alone between two Commonwealth nations.
Yes.
Like then,
which are supposed to be explicitly excluded, isn't it? Commonwealth
so
disputes.
It cannot be binding between two Commonwealth nations, which why it was non-binding.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was rubbish to start with.
Yeah.
Like it should have been thrown out. And we do not recognise the ICJ anyway.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was just ridiculous to start with.
What's your view on the fact that ultimately Labour have finished this deal, but at the very least negotiations started under the last government?
Yeah, I mean, I would say this: everyone's got a choice to drop these things. You know, even if the Conservatives
that's fair enough.
could have driven this up, Labour could have come in and just stopped the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, everyone has that choice to just drop it. I mean, when David Cameron came in as foreign secretary and said, let's just drop it.
Yeah.
Then it was gone.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't continued. Maybe the civil service continued it because that's what the civil service do. But, you know, he made that decision just to drop it there and then, and Labour picked it back up and just ran with it.
Yeah, it is amusing, isn't it, that Labour have spent the last 14 months trying to pin every problem in the country on the Conservatives and saying that they're here to clean up the mess.
Yeah, they could have stopped.
Yeah, so it doesn't quite work in this case. In this case, you can argue the Conservatives made a bit of a mess, but Labour are very much not trying to clean it up. Yeah, Labour are very much trying to compound it.
Without going into, you know, larger topics, a lot of the last government has just continued under Labour.
Yeah.
And Labour just said, oh, we're just finishing off what they started.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you're meant to have your own policies. So
you're supposed to be against what they started.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the whole thing. You're supposed to not like what they started.
So,
yeah. So that brings us to yesterday, which, as I said, was a second reading and some of the debates over the costs. And you mentioned our story, and just want to get some more reaction right now to this. So there's been a lot of disputes about exactly how much the Chagos Deal is going to cost. The government have been pushing this £3.4 billion figure.
3.4 to start with.
Yeah, actually the government actuaries department.
But we all knew about, as soon as he said that in that press conference, we knew something was right. Even the journalist in that room said, well, hold on, this doesn't really add up. You said 100 million a year.
Yeah, linked to inflation as well.
How does that even add up? So from the start, we knew something was fishy. Yeah. And then this 35 billion figure came out. I mean, I think it was Nigel Farage who was saying 52 billion.
Yeah, he said 52. Well, we got quite close to Nigel,
we thought that was a bit off because even we did some estimates and we were like, that's not quite right.
Yeah.
But then the 34 billion, was it 34?
47 billion is our figure.
The
35 billion is the government actuaries.
Yeah. And then you released the other day that it was 47.
Yeah.
So that was 12 billion more, the last estimate that came out.
Yeah, and the key issue here is that these payments are linked to inflation.
Yeah.
So after I think 2038, the government have said that the payments will go up with inflation. Of course, we don't know what inflation is going to be. So to some extent, this could be, you know, if we have Jim Callaghan levels, 25% inflation, this could be a catastrophic bill. So to some extent, you have to make an assumption about what that inflation rate is going to be. And the government use essentially a historic rate of inflation, so what we've had in recent decades, which is what the OBI uses. But the market, which of course is, you know, thinking about the future and is making massive financial decisions based on the future, and therefore probably is a little bit more credible than people that are just looking at the past. The market, if you look at the difference, you know, without getting into the technicals, the difference between inflation-linked government debt and non-inflation-linked government debt, that's actually 2.9%, which means that if you take that 2.9% and extend that over that 100-year period, that's how you get to that 47 billion pounds. But of course, whether it's 47 billion pounds or 35 billion pounds,
it doesn't escape the fact that we're giving away something that we own in perpetuity.
Yeah, it's extraordinary,
It's insane. Yeah. It's bonkers. It's absolutely bonkers.
And why is Mauritius not paying us 47 billion pounds for these islands? That's the real question. This is not, it's like, you know, it's like selling your car to someone, except you have to give them the money and the car.
Yeah.
And they don't give you anything. Maybe you're allowed to drive it once a week still, but
and there's no guarantee that after those 99 years that we'll be able to keep the base on Diego Garcia either.
No, exactly.
So the security
at some point
guarantee isn't even there.
Yeah.
They said that we'll get first priority in say 80 years time but they can just turn around to us and say no. Yeah. We don't want that. China's actually bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a part of me that thinks the US will just come and buy the whole thing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't escape that, you know, it's our territory.
Yeah.
You know,
and
it's like selling off an island in Scotland.
It's also worth saying, you know, 100 years isn't as long as people think, right?
No.
Let's think about 75 years ago. Who were our main geopolitical adversaries and enemies 75 years ago? China and Russia.
China.
Who are today our main geopolitical adversaries and enemies?
More
Rivals. It's the same, right? So this idea that in 100 years' time, the world is going to be a completely different place, it's entirely possible. We face exactly the same problems, exactly the same rivals, and that base is going to have exactly the same importance.
I mean, just in a geopolitical, geostrategic view, that island is the only US, UK base in the Indo-Pacific region. It's completely owned by us.
Yeah.
And we're right there, we're surrounded by India, China, East African air bases. We're surrounded by almost the enemy already there.
Yeah.
And that's the last bastion of refueling for nuclear submarines. It's, the Air Force runs through it, the Navy runs through it. It's the last stop between, say, Singapore, which is our next base along.
So to fire one last question before we finish here, let's say this deal goes through and we hand over sovereignty to Mauritius, and then Reform or the Conservatives or a mixture win the next election. What do you think they should do about it? What can they do about it?
It's going to be really difficult because they say that they can just tear up a treaty. Treaties can go back, but the thing is, if you stop those payments for Diego Garcia, it gives Mauritius, then they can say, oh, we'll kick you off Diego Garcia then. You lose the right to run that airbase.
And the alternative is essentially invading Mauritius and going to war with Mauritius, which is...
Or just re-invading the Chagos Islands.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. And we have floated that idea. But that's the only option. So they say that
at which point
they can tear it up, but I'm not
you risk
sure.
the Chinese getting involved because you'd be invading
Mauritius
Chinese
is in debt
ally.
to China.
Yeah.
So it's like if it's a side, they're going to take the Chinese side.
Yeah. So not much we can do really.
We have to end it now before ratification, before the king signs it.
Yeah.
Before the king signs off his own territory.
Yeah.
We have to stop this. And we will pull whatever lever we have got to do this with now. We have to. Everyone has to pull out a finger. We can no longer be bystanders to this. We have to pull out our finger. Lobby your MP. Lobby everyone. Tell everyone this is taxpayers' money. This is 47 billion pounds of our money. We go to work every day. We see that money taken out of our accounts. That's our money that's going into Mauritius to fund tax cuts.
For 80% of them, I think, it's extraordinary. Well, on that note, the Taxpayers Alliance actually have a Write to Your MP tool, taxpayersalliance.com/Chagos. We've had tens of thousands of people use that tool to write to their MPs already. I think there's only 3 MPs that have yet to receive an email from someone using that tool. So I absolutely echo that. And on that note, Robert, thanks so much for coming and taking the time.
Thanks for having me.